what we did last week, and we'll continue that conversation. So welcome everyone, and just as we try and just ask people at the beginning, not that we don't want to hear you, but just so you can hear everything clearly if you're not speaking, if you don't mind just muting yourselves, we'll be able to hear each other very clearly. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. I'm Mark Kligman, and it's really just with great pleasure that I welcome you to this event, and I look forward to introducing and working with our presenter today. Before I do, we just want to say that we invite you all to continue to be part of our programs, and I just want to give a big thanks to Geraldine Auerbach and Martha Stellmacher for helping to make all these weekly conversations develop, and we're all taking great advantage of the technology innovations to adjust our lives in ways that we can find meaning, and to internationally have discussions of Jewish music is just real special thing for all of us. So I'm grateful that we're able to do this. And then our activities here at UCLA, Lori Black, who's sort of in the background for us today due to some other commitments, and then to Beth Kramer, thank you for all your help. So we'll post a link to so you can sign up for our other conversations. And we have this slot on Tuesdays already organized for not only several weeks, but several months ahead. So we just hope that you'll be with us every week at this time. So today's guest is a very special treat for me to introduce, and I want to do it in a very personal way and say that in the 1980s, I read this incredible article in the Journal of the American Musicological Society that was published in 1950. I read it in the 80s about the structure of Jewish prayer chant, and it was sort of such an incredibly memorable article for me because it organized Nusach in a way that was understandable, presentable, and something I've referred to many, many times. A few years later, about 10 years later, I was visiting LA. I grew up in LA, but at the time I wasn't living in LA. And I find out from my wife's grandfather that there was this incredible Hazan by the name of Baruch Cohon who sang at his 80th birthday party. And he said, Baruch Cohon is the greatest chazan. And I thought to myself, could that be the same Baruch Cohon that wrote this article that I love so much? And I just thought, wow, what a coincidence. Unfortunately, my wife's grandfather died a few years later. And because of the great love that my wife's grandfather had for Rabbi Cantor Baruch Cohon, Baruch Cohon officiated at his funeral. And I got to meet Baruch Cohon at that time and introduce myself. Fast forward a number of years later when I came back to LA to work at UCLA, and there was this wonderful event when I came, and Baruch Cohon introduced himself to me, and I was just so pleased that for the last few years I could get to know Baruch Cohon and learn so much about his many contributions on so many different levels. And it's a real great pleasure that we get to meet a truly interesting, fascinating individual who's joined by his son, Sam Cohon, who's an accomplished rabbi who's done many things as well, who will be assisting Baruch. The last thing I want to say is that Baruch wrote this wonderful memoir that just came out a couple of years ago called Making Sense of My Century. And in it, he describes himself in the following way, which I thought would be the best way to begin. Looking back over the past 90 years, I can call myself a student, a sailor, musician, husband, father, writer, producer, a production manager, cantor, and rabbi. A middle American, a sometime home repairman, minor electrician or plumbing, jobs preferred, no painting please, and a committed Jew. So with that introduction, I'm so glad that Rabbi Cantor Baruch Cohon can join us. And I just want to begin by welcoming you and maybe asking you to just talk to us about, just give us sort of the lay of the land. When and where were you born? And tell us about some of your earliest musical experiences.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for inviting me to be on it. My son Sam with me, as he'll be able to fill in a lot of vocal work that I'm not up to these days. As far as my early background, my earliest musical memories are, number one, brachas at the table. My father had a wonderful musical memory from his early days in the village in Minsk Gubernia, what's now called Belarus, and his yeshiva days in Minsk. And he never forgot a melody, and he used it very wisely. So he also, of course, he wrote 10 books about Judaism that have his name on them. 4 were published during his lifetime, and the other 6 posthumously published because, unfortunately, he left us at an early age. This last one, Faithfully Yours, I had the privilege of editing. And he has left quite a heritage of Jewish knowledge. He was professor of theology at Hebrew Union College for many years. Of course, my mother sang lullabies to me, and she my family always say, well, West meets East, because she came from Portland, Oregon, and she met my father in Cincinnati. She had an idea to become the first female rabbi, but they weren't ordaining women in those days.
In 1910 or so, right? Around then.
That's right, and they had a young student there that had more background than some of their faculty, so they had him instructing some of the other students. That instructor was my father. So that's how they met, and in 1912 they were married. So she brought her love of music, particularly of Jewish music, into that marriage. And my father had a congregation in Chicago where my mother was active, and she wrote, in 1923, she wrote this book, which the Sisterhoods published, Introduction to Jewish Music. She did her own research from the Jewish Encyclopedia, from the works of Abraham Baer, and she had really a very thorough introduction to Jewish music and recommended it to all her readers. So that was my introduction into this field. And then, of course, at age 5, I got my first teacher of music of any kind, who was a very fine teacher of everybody. His name was Avram Tzvi Idelsohn. This is his picture from the collection from Israel, and he taught me truck. Cantillations of the Torah and the other books of the Bible, starting at age 5. So I had a pretty solid background there. Of course, Idelsohn's greatest accomplishment was as he became the father of Jewish musicology, because he collected traditional Jewish melodies from all over the world. One was this is a volume of one of the 10 volumes of the Idelsohn Thesaurus of Hebrew Oriental Melodies. And in there, you'll find a very interesting little piece of music. During the First World War, he was in Jerusalem, and he was drafted in the Turkish army at the lead a band in the trenches in Gaza. So with Idelsohn's help, Turkey lost the war. And then it comes 1919, that's just 101 years ago. He was now in Jerusalem, and he had a chorus, and they were doing a victory concert. The British were in, the Turks were out, and they were celebrating. And he needed a good finale for this concert. And he didn't have one, but he had a file, because he had collected all this music, all over the simple melody from the Hasidim of Sadigora in Ukraine. And he took this, he arranged it in 4 parts for his chorus, wrote some simple Hebrew lyrics, come, let's rejoice, let's be happy. And he taught it to his chorus, and they sang it as the finale in this victory concert. And by his own account, the next day, he heard people singing it all over Jerusalem. From there, it swept the country, swept the world, and it is still, 101 years later, the best known Jewish song in the world. What's the name of it? Hava Nagila. So that's his most popular accomplishment. But he
was your teacher, though, really from the time you were 5 till when?
Oh yeah, well, he was my teacher until he left for South Africa. My father, Oliver Shalom, met Idelsohn when he arrived in this country after spending his earlier years in Europe and South Africa and Israel. So he arrived in this country around 1925, 24, 25. My father met him at a convention in New York and invited him to Chicago, where he came and he met my mother, he met my father. He didn't want to stay there because he had a tour, a concert tour planned for the United States. He went on this concert tour and came back. In the meantime, my father was offered the faculty position,
Professorship,
in Cincinnati. And he went there, he found out that they had a library that had a whole collection of Jewish music that nobody knew how to catalog. So he said, I have the perfect man for you. And they brought Idelsohn to Cincinnati to catalog that music library. And then they made him professor of Jewish music and Jewish liturgy. So he stayed in Cincinnati for quite a while, from my 5th year until probably 9th year. And so he taught me also how to read notes. And so that was the book that I just showed you is the 10th volume of his 10-volume thesaurus of Hebrew Oriental melodies. And the melody that he took out of there, you'll find, if you want to look up a set of that, you'll find it in volume 10, number 155, with no lyrics. This was just a melody. He wrote the lyrics later.
So he also conducted the choir in the chapel at HUC in Cincinnati?
Yes, in Cincinnati, he conducted the temple choir, the chapel choir, and he also had his classes. He was a very unusual classroom professor because think about him. He called on a student there, said, look up in your book. And the student said, I don't have my book with me. And he said, so he marked him absent. He said, a boy without a book is no boy. So that was kind of a character he was. He was very well known and liked among all the students. He eventually left Cincinnati for South Africa, where his family was settling, and then from there went back to Israel. As a matter of fact, I've been in touch with his family ever since. And last year, his great-grandson got in touch with me because he is preparing a biography of Avram Tzvi Idelsohn and wanted my input. I'll show you some of the publications. This is his Sefer HaShirim that was published in Jerusalem many years ago. And what's very unique about it is that the music is printed from right to left to accord with the Hebrew lyrics.
A little difficult if you're trained the other way, though. I mean.
Well, some musicians find this very. Wrote an opera while he was there called Yiftach Jephthah, a grand opera. So this is some of my memories of Idelsohn. Actually, there was other Jewish music in Cincinnati that I had some experience with. The style of synagogue music in those days was not what it is now. The Reform congregations had no cantors that didn't use cantors. They didn't have choirs on the bima either. The choir, as for example, think of Rockdale Temple in Cincinnati, which was a classical reform. They had a bima, of course. The rabbi and the presidents stood on the bima, and up in the choir loft there were 4 church singers. And always remember how they did the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. The rabbi would say the first line in Hebrew in stentorian tones, because they have no microphones, of course. Stentorian tones, and then the choir up in the choir loft would sing, "The Lord bless thee and keep thee." It's a real church response. But on the other side of the other end of the spectrum were the Orthodox congregations, where they had either amateur cantors or professional cantors. Sometimes visiting cantors would come and do special concert services there. And I always remember my mother walking me to services one Saturday morning, and I asked her, let's go to Washington Street Shul instead of Rockdale Temple. And she said, why? I said, because there everybody sings. And it was a whole different atmosphere. So that was what attracted me. In the house, of course, we had records, including some classical cantorial records. And one of them was a favorite of mine, was Jacob Rappaport's composition, Elu Devorim. And I'm going to ask my son, Sam, who has a voice, which I don't have now, give us a little sample of that.
Elu Devorim she'lo shiur, apei of abikurim yorai. Umilut chasodim v'talmud Torah. Umilut chasodim v'talmud Torah. Elu devorim she'ein lohem shiur.
And that is, of course, the famous Mishnah, these things cannot be measured. Things like bringing the first fruits and bringing offerings, and also things like being kind to people and
Helping the bride and groom, following the
bringing
dead.
home the bride, burying the dead. All these things are too valuable to measure, but the study of Torah, Talmud Torah, keneged kulam, the study of Torah is equal to them all. One thing that comes across in this particular composition, typical of classical chazonas, is repetition. Some words and phrases are repeated over and over again. You just heard it. Elu devorim she'ein, elu devorim, elu devorim. These things have no measure. They're repeated for emphasis, or they're repeated for musical content, or for whatever reason. But they bring to mind a little incident, experience that I had after I retired. This is like 25 years ago. But after I retired from Temple Manual, my last cantorial job, I began attending Shabbos services at Chabad. And went to Chabad Shul on Pico Boulevard. And he knew that I was a cantor. And one morning, the rabbi invited me to daven Shachris. And he said, well, you know, we don't repeat words. I said, all right. And I managed to go through the entire Shachris service without repeating any words. But I want to tell you, I felt like I was driving down the street with my brakes on. I mean, it was quite a change. Anyway, I have some musical memories of prayers that I still chant in the same tune that I heard from some of the Cincinnati Chazonim, like Cantor Emo Rosen, Oliver Shalom, at Avondale Synagogue, Keladon, that comes in the Sabbath morning services. I was still using the melody that I heard from him. So at age 12, my mother took me to a wonderful chazan by the name of Jacob Beimel, who later on I found out that the president of the Cantors Assembly also studied with him. But he was a very fine, tolerant teacher, and he took this kid, 12-year-old kid, and taught me all the specifics of Nusach and interpretation and the holidays and everything. So that by the time I had my bar mitzvah, I was pretty competent. And
So
then,
when you were in New York, you also auditioned for Juilliard, right, on piano?
oh yes, I did. They offered me to take me into the school there, but my mother decided she was not going to leave me in New York alone at the age, so I did not go to Juilliard. Anyway, at 17, I got my first cantorial job. That was for a high holiday position in Pontiac, Michigan. The young rabbi there had been a student of my father's, and he knew that I could do the chazonas. So that was my introduction into the field professionally. Of course, that was 1943. World War II was raging. So I left Pontiac in September, and a month later I was in the Navy. So there was about 3 years there. Came back after World War II, came back to Cincinnati. And had friends there. We used to go to Young Israel every Shabbos. Friday, we parked the jalopy in the Young Israel driveway and walked to shul the next day. So that was where we had a chance to do our davening. Everybody in the shul had a chance to lead the services at one time or another. And so I kept on doing my chazonas on a humble basis until I had some interest in show business, decided to move to California. Moving to California in 1947, and then a year or two later, my parents moved out there too, and my father transferred to the HUC in Los Angeles. And my mother, meanwhile, had set up a company called the Publications for Judaism, which was getting ready to publish Idelsohn's Jewish Songbook in its third edition. First two editions were all was sold out, and she saw a need for this, and she had me edit it. But in order to be qualified as an editor, my parents encouraged me to write this article that Mark discussed, the article in the American Musicological Society Journal on the structure of the synagogue prayer chant. Here is the original magazine.
From 1950.
1950 it was published.
So you were 23, 24 when you wrote this.
That's right. And then that same year, the Idelsohn Songbook was published, and this is the third edition of Idelson's work, which was distributed in 90 countries. So it was made its mark. So
in writing that article, you had to kind of create, I mean, there wasn't any other background for explaining how Nussach worked. That wasn't, I mean, there wasn't a similar article available.
that's right.
You just had to kind of break it down as you understood it.
Yes. No, I didn't have any real problem doing that because I've been working with this all my life.
Right.
And so we did that. And so then I had some cantorial positions in California. The first one was in Pasadena with Rabbi Max Forspan, Shalom, who not only he and his wife became friends of mine, but Max, of course, became quite prominent in the Jewish life in Los Angeles, particularly the University of Judaism, now known as American Jewish University. And then I had transferred to UCLA, where I was cantor for the UCLA Hillel. And also I met a cute blonde from New Jersey by the name of Claire. And we worked on the same show together. And eventually we got married. 1950, we got married, and we moved into an apartment. And of course, we had absolutely no money. As a day camp counselor in a little congregation in Westchester near the LA airport. She came home one day and she said, "They're looking for a cantor down there." I said, "They are, huh?" So I went down and auditioned, and I got the job. So this was my second cantorial position in California. Of course, auditioning for a cantorial position, I know they still do that, but not the way we did then. Because anywhere I never went for a job as a chazan, nobody asked me if I graduated from kindergarten. They just said, "Get up there and daven. Either you can do it or you can't." And they knew what to expect. It's not like that now. We'll get back to that. But I was chazan there for a while. Still see some people's early 50s. Then I went from there to the studios and went to a conservative congregation in the valley called Valley Beth Israel, where...
Before that, I think you were at Temple Israel of Hollywood, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
I know because you were there when I was born. I still remember. So
of course. Well, that's true. In 1959 and 60, I substituted for Cantor Saul Silverman, Shalom, who was actually my first friend in California. A very fine man and a good cantor, and he was going on vacation. So he engaged me to fill in for him while he was gone. And it was interesting, you know, here I was working on these crummy little TV series, but sitting next to me on the bima were executives from the major studios, guys like Steve Broidy and Marvin Mirisch, who would sit next to me on the bima. They'd be absolutely no good in Hollywood, but it was very interesting at the temple. So, in 1961, well, they were also very respectful of my father, and when he passed away in 1959, I wrote this in his memory. This was Avoda Simcha. His name was Simcha. This man is named after him, and that was published there in his memory. So
so it's a complete Friday night service, but then also a lot of other music that you had composed.
Well, Nidre has other things in it.
Right.
So I began to compose. And at this point, Mark, if we can play a composition from from those days, it was called Our Brothers, and takes a fable from Jewish literature and puts it to music. You play Our Brothers?
Yep, working on it. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Here we go. Here we go.
In die Teire steht geschrieben, als Jesef Avinu ist verblondet geworden in a fremden Feld.
It is written in the Torah that our father Joseph got lost in a strange field.
Hat ihm getroffen und gefragt, was suchst du, was suchst du?
A stranger found him there and said, "What are you looking for? What are you searching for?"
Hat Jesef gesagt,
And Joseph replied, I'm looking for my brother.
Jetzt suchen wir unsere Brüder, wo seinen sie, wo seinen
And
sie?
now we search for our brothers. Oh, where are our brothers now?
Unsere Brüder in
Our
Russland,
brothers in
unsere Brüder in
Russia.
Afrika,
Our brothers in Africa.
unsere Brüder in Eretz Israel,
Our brothers in the land of
unsere Brüder in
Israel.
Amerika,
Our brothers in America.
unsere arme, verlorene, verblonjete Brüder.
Mark, if you can go to that. 3 minutes.
Yerachem Aleichem, Hamakom, Yerachem Aleichem, V'yotzihem, Me'afehil Aleora, Mishibot Legeyolo.
Have mercy on them and bring them out from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light, quickly, soon, now.
That's it. No, that's just a
You want to tell us who's singing on the recording?
That's plenty. No,
yeah.
that shows it.
That's the idea.
Why don't you tell us who's singing on the recording?
We're both singing on the recording.
Okay, just wanted everyone to know.
No, I mean, that was recorded sometime later, but that's when I wrote it in those days.
We recorded that like in '92, I think,
Yeah.
also, a while back.
No, Sam and I put out an album called Generation, and we we did a lot of duets like that. Excuse me. Of course,
So,
I found out while I was at Valley Beth Israel, of course, I was doing weddings, which Cantor is perfectly qualified to do, as you probably know. What was happening though was that somebody down at City Hall didn't recognize the name Cantor, and they were bouncing these wedding certificates back. And here, I don't want to get my people in trouble. If I have people that want to get married and they want me to marry them, I better get ordained. So I began to study and work with Rabbi Singer, Olav Sholem, who was at that time based in Los Angeles. And he ordained me in 1969. That's how I got the rabbinical title. Sam started as a cantor too, and then became a rabbi. But I guess it goes in the family. So that's how we did. And in 1973, I became cantor at Temple Emmanuel, Beverly Hills, which we referred to earlier today. And some of the people that sang with me there, I see are with us this morning, and I'm welcoming them. At this point in our experience, Reform was becoming a little more traditional. And I was working there with Rabbi Mike Heller, Olav Sholem, and Cantor Eddie Kroll, Olav Sholem, who were partly involved in this process. They decided, the congregation decided they wanted to add another cantor to the staff. And a man came to my services in the Valley, who was the chairman of the ritual committee, later became a good friend, a man named Sandy Kahn. And he apparently liked what he heard, went back and told them, that's the man we should hire. So they did. And I was there, Baruch Hashem, for 21 years and made friends there. And we also gave some new input to the music of that congregation. The number that I wrote there, which I'd like to hear us share right now, featuring myself and a soloist and the Oriana Singers. It's called Ashkivenu in Hebrew, and the English translation from the Union Prayer Book was Let There Be Love. Will you play that, Mark, please?
And he was integrating cantorial. No, it's fine, Mark. Go ahead.
Let there be peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Eternal God, help us walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts, and eternity our thoughts. Let there be love.
Let us lie down in peace, let us rise up to life and to life and to confidence. Let there be love,
Let there be
let there be peace,
Let there be love. Let there be
And I also did other arrangements because really choral and instrumental music were becoming as important as solos. It was the Jewish musical expression in the prayers was not limited to solo singing. And for the non-Orthodox congregations, it became essential to have choral arrangements and instrumental background. So we did that, and also had a chance to do some music with children. Some children and teenagers spent the summer at Brandeis Camp, where I had them all singing Ahava ve'achva, Shalom v'reus, love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. Ahava ve'achva, Shalom v'reus. And it became a theme song of the camp that year. It's called "We Wish You Love."
Dad, you were talking about your arrangements, and some of them were vocal that you were working with Ariana, so you had a chance to do some kind of madrigal-y arrangements.
That's right. One of them was based on the call of the shofar, and it uses the text of a high holiday prayer, Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, blow the great horn for our freedom. Tekah b'shofar, Mark, if we could hear a little of that.
Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, Mesanes lekabez galuyotenu, vekabetzenu yahad mehera me'arba kantot haaretz me'atzenu.
Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, v'sanes lekabez galuyotenu, v'kabetzenu yachad mehera me'arba kantot haaretz me'atzenu.
Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, v'sanes lekabez galuyotenu.
V'kabetzenu yachad mehera me'arba kantot haaretz me'atzenu. V'kabetzenu yachad mehera me'arba kantot haaretz
also had a chance to work with a wonderful group of kids. In those days, Temple Emmanuel had a day school, a full-time day school, named now for the memory of Ted Shalom. And I had the pleasure of conducting 200 kids' voices in chorus for that. We can go to the
piano.
not yet.
Oh, not yet.
No.
Sorry.
And one of the yes, we can, because one of the developments that was really important, I think, in my experience in Jewish music, was the change, not to change the musical content to some rock and roll that they knew, but to make the Jewish sound palatable and enjoyable for the children. And I think we managed to do that quite often. Let's go to the piano, because I want to show you the most profitable composition I ever wrote.
Yeah, why don't you bring that?
Yeah.
So, through the magic of technology. I think I can get you a picture there.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
Now, of course, Hanukkah being what it is, this is a very simple Hanukkah song, which somehow got introduced into the public school system, and particularly the English lyrics were taught to kids' choirs in the public schools. They put it on in the winter when they have other winter holidays to celebrate.
Some other holiday.
Yeah, so they added this.
Bing bum, bing bum, bing bum, bing bum, bing bum. Bing bum, bing bum, bing bum, bing bum, bing bum, bing bum. אני שמחה על התשובות והמלחמה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה על ידי כהניך הקדושים וחשבון עד ימי חנוכה וחשבון עד ימי חנוכה הנרות הללו הנרות הללו קודשים ים בים בם בים בם בים בם בים בם בים bum. Candle the candles, remembering days of old. Lights full of history, lights full of mystery, sparks from the battles brave and bold. Telling a story of ancient glory, Maccabees who fought to worship free. Still standing by us, so magnifies, those you faithful, come along. Each night we had one light, we had a prayer that freedom is for all. We know we keep them holy till the 800 great and small. Oh, that's fine.
That's the basic idea. But being a member of ASCAP, I get royalties from that. It surpasses anything else I ever wrote.
Well, there's another story to that, which is somebody actually took your song from one of the books, set an arrangement, and was collecting the royalties on it. But until you contacted an attorney, and then the royalties came back to you.
Yeah, right. Well, to sum up this whole experience of mine, I think we have explored the different styles from European classical, whether it's Eastern or Western Europe, to Yiddish folk music, to American. And we have authentic Jewish melodies in non-religious use, both here and in Israel. And we have made it now the subject for higher education, which is really the Mark Kligman story, because when they were announced that the music in a secular university would be in memory of Mickey Katz, I heard about this, and I went over to the school where I knew some people, and I said, look, I'm not applying for a job. I just want to know what your
Criteria.
Well, the criteria, not the criteria, but the content of the course would be. I said, I mean, you know, Haim off the Range is great fun, but there's more to Jewish music than that. Will this be limited to the music of Mickey Katz? And the figure talk, they hired the right man. And so it really the pleasure of welcoming Mark Kligman to UCLA at the Hillel event in his honor. And very glad to be here with him today. We have cantorial schools, and as I said, the audition story for anybody that's involved in cantorial work, the audition story changed quite a bit since my day. And now it's not just a matter of go up and daven. It's not, did you have the 4 or 5 years of cantorial study that qualify you for this job? And of course, that's because in my day, the people who were auditioning knew what to expect. They knew the nusach, they knew the style, and they wanted to hear how you conducted a service. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of an informed laity in most congregations today. So the schools are very necessary, and a course like the one here at UCLA is even more necessary, because with a little bit of luck, we'll educate a new generation of Jewish people who are interested in music and in musical content. So I want to thank you for this opportunity here, Mark, to join with you. And I want to thank my son, Sam, for helping out with this whole process. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Baruch and Sam. Thank you for assisting by singing and helping in every way. And this is wonderful. So there are a couple of questions that people have already posted to the chat. One, Baruch, is if you want to spend just a few minutes talking about your experiences in Hollywood and the Hollywood studios. And I think it's one I know you love to talk about. So I'd love to ask you that. And, you know, if you, and the question also refers to, you know, kind of like the engagement of Jews in Hollywood and what that means in different ways.
The engagement of what in Hollywood?
Jews in Hollywood.
Jews in Hollywood, yeah.
Well, of course, the motion picture business was really a Jewish endeavor in many ways. Everything from Louis B. Mayer to the fellow that I worked with at Ziv.
Ivan Torres? No.
Well, Ivan Torres too. Ivan Torres came from Hungary. And I remember one day I asked him, I said, Ivan, are you Jewish? He said, if you want me to be Jewish, I am Jewish. This my mother was Jewish. But the average Jewish executive in the studios had really no connection with the religious life of the Jews. Very few. Some did, like I told you, some of the executives that sat on the beam with me at Temple Israel. But most of the Jewish filmmakers were secular. And that was my experience there. And, you know, it was a 6-day. First of all, it was a 6-day week in those days, and so there was no Shabbos, and it was a very very secular atmosphere among all part of. We could crack jokes at each other with a Yiddish punchline, but that's about as far as it went.
Now
What?
do you want to talk about Gene Wilder at all, or any of that stuff?
What?
Gene Wilder at all?
Oh.
Any of that?
Well, yeah, Sam just brought up one experience that I had. Maybe you saw a picture several years ago, many years ago now, called The Frisco Kid. The leading actor in that picture was a man named Gene Wilder, who, of course, was Jewish, but probably the last time he was in the show was at his own bar mitzvah. So I was hired as to teach him how to daven. I was what do they call it in those days? I forgot the name of it.
Technical advisor.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we became pretty good friends, and he had some wonderful scenes there. Picture where he and this gambler, played by Harrison Ford, were sleeping in a ditch, and he wakes up in the morning, and here's this guy standing over him with a long black coat and a beard, and he says, "Oh, Lantzman." And then he sees the book sticking out of this man's pocket. It has a big cross on it. So it was a
Amish country.
Amish.
But the story about Wilder I was thinking of was when, he came to you to learn, because he had to play a Polish rabbi. He came to you to learn how to daven. By the way, if you watch, old versions of Frisco Kid, Gene Wilder sounds like my dad davening in the morning. He got it down well. He was really good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In the late, there was called Jews in something about
Jews in Hollywood.
Jews in Hollywood. Yeah. And he was one that of the stars, Jewish film stars. He was one of the stars that they interviewed. And he talked about the technical advisors that he had on the pictures. There were three of them. Actually, two of them were rabbis that worked with me at Temple Emmanuel, because the producer was a member of Temple Emmanuel. And
Mace Neufeld.
The Mace Neufeld, yeah. And I see his son quite often, Brad Neufeld, who credits me with his becoming observant. But anyway, the other two advisors were Rabbi Heller and Rabbi Robbins. Steve Robbins, who is, thank God, still with us. And so Gene Wilder, in his interview, in his book, said, well, I had these three helpers.
Technical advisors.
The Cantor was the best one, he said, because he gave me tapes, which I did. And he learned those tapes right now, He knew what he was doing. He also had a friend, Gene Wilder himself, although he was a comedian and he could get big roars of laughter out of his audience. But personally, he was a shy guy. He was not a big extrovert, personally. He visiting him on the set once, he goes in his dressing room, and pretty soon his best friend comes to meet him. And all of a sudden I hear big laughter out of his room. Who was his best friend? Mel Brooks, who was always on. So they were quite a combination. Anything else? Anybody else want to say?
Sure, we have a couple more questions. We're such a small group. People should certainly ask them themselves. So Jeremiah, do you want to ask your question about Cantors in LA?
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. First of all, Cantor, for this extremely lively and fascinating presentation. It's been really wonderful getting to put a face to your legendary article. So it's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm very interested in cantorial Los Angeles in the 1950s and 60s, and how there were some kind of vestiges of the culture of gold cantors, of star cantors in the city in this period, and how cantors interfaced with changing tastes, what kind of interaction there was between the kind of the old schoolers and the younger seminary trained cantors. If you could talk a little bit about the cantorial cult in Los Angeles in this period, I'd be very fascinated to hear about that.
Well, you talk about the 50s and 60s. As far as I remember, the cantorial training was very limited. It was either private, like mine, or it was fake. We had, these guys took a job as a cantor because they could sing well, but that didn't mean they knew anything. And so we had some organization. I don't remember much about that, but it was nothing like what exists now. Now, because of the organizations, after all, we did have the Cantors Assembly, which was a national organization, and I always remember taking the man that was a chazan at Valley Beth Israel, Valley Beth Sholem, for many years.
Was it Uri Frankel?
Up in the morning, I'll call you. But
Was it Uri Frankel?
no, I know Uri Frankel was a good friend of mine, but I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about
Julius Blackman was there at some point, and I don't know if that.
Blackman was here, yes, and anyway, this man at Valley Beth Israel, at Valley Beth Sholem, was the chazan there, and he was a good entertainer. He knew Yiddish, and
Oh, you're talking about Herschel Fox.
Herschel
Fox.
I'm sorry, what's the last name?
Fox.
Fox.
That's right, Herschel Fox. I convinced Herschel to go with me to the convention, and we were flying there. And he said, I shouldn't even be going here. He said, I said, why not? He said, I'm not really a chazan. I'm a Yiddish actor. So but when he got there, we used to have a program every evening, and after the meeting, they'd have some kind of entertainment. They'd get up, sing a solo or something like that. And one night Herschel gets up and does a comedy routine, and he had them rolling in the aisles. He was the biggest hit there. But we had a chapter of the Cantors Assembly, and there was also, I think, some of the for Orthodox and Reform may have had cantorial organizations, but the Cantors Assembly of the conservative movement was probably the biggest one. And that's for 50s and 60s were all right. There was plenty of activity and a certain amount of organization, but I think it was a different ball game than we have now.
So Malcolm Miller has a really interesting question. Malcolm, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, what is it? Mr. Miller? Good.
Hello, yes, that was really interesting. Thank you so much. And wonderful to hear you playing and singing your own music. I had a question, actually. It was regarding some of your settings which combine Hebrew and English. And I was thinking about this combination of languages in general in synagogue music. And when you also mentioned, when you recalled in your synagogue, I don't know where it was in your youth, where the choir sang in English response, a sort of church response to the priestly blessing, to the Chazan. And I was just thinking, is the purpose, and is it something to do with American Jewish music? Because I don't hear it much in London, when you have a setting in Hebrew that you have overlaid with English. So does the English perform a sort of, is it there just sort of to translate? Is it there to educate? Is there a sort of way in which it's somehow expressing where one is, the sort of identity of being between cultures, as it were? I just throw it out. And also, are there any composers or cantors that have done that, which led you to do it in your own music, this mixture? Obviously, if you have Yiddish words, not everyone understands them. It's nice to have English to help one along. So that's certainly useful.
Yes, I think that's a trend that was necessary because Hebrew was not as well known as time went by, and maybe the educational industry or the Jewish education became a little less demanding and maybe a little less effective, and so we needed the English lyrics to support it. I had an uncle, although Shalom was rabbi in London for many years, and maybe
really? Where was that? Where was it?
You know who he was? Harold Reinhardt was his name. He was rabbi of the West London Synagogue.
Oh yes.
And during the war, they sent over a kinder transport from Europe, and he met the fellow who was leading it, who later became his successor, and his name was never mind. What? Anyway, he told my uncle about a warehouse in Prague where the Germans had stored all the Sifrei Torah that they looted from synagogues all over Europe. And my uncle said, we got to do something about that. He raised some money from the London Jewish community, and he and my aunt went over there. They brought back not only all the Sifrei Torah, but they brought back another load of kids. And that's what started the Holocaust Torah Project. And it's still located in London, as you probably know.
Wow, amazing. So what year, when was that? Was that very soon after the war?
It was, just during the war, I started,
There's the Westminster Synagogue.
It was
Czech Torah Project. I think Geraldine knows about it. But what you were saying about the English, would the idea of sort of that it's important to spread, so to generate sort of understanding of the Hebrew text through having translation is something which is still valid now? Is it still important?
A lot of people, as we know from our own experiences, I'm sure you know as well as I do, if you stick to the Hebrew text alone, and as if you're strictly Orthodox, Hasidic, you stick to the Hebrew text alone, and you're supposed to know what it means. So rather than try to remember as you go along, the trend would be to add translations to the music so that you'll have it in your mind as you go along. That was the trend.
Thanks. Thank you very much. That's great. I will look up your uncle's story.
Thank all of you for being with us. Mark, if we can find that number of Pitachta, I'd like to use that for a finale.
Okay, we'll cue it up. Thank everyone for coming. And we thank you so much, Baruch, for sharing your stories. And we'll play that one.
Pitachta saki, patazreini
So thank you, Baruch. As a one quick closing comment, I want to say that one of the great pleasures of being here in LA is meeting many people in Jewish music, cantors who've been students of yours, who you've influenced, and to see the impact you've made. It's really, really wonderful. So we thank you for taking the time to share with us, and a big thanks to Sam for lending his voice and his good spirit and all his help.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'll show you one more book which is available. This is not a history book. This is now. It's called Songs for My People, and published by Tara. It's available with songs of mine for all occasions, like you know, Sabbath and holidays and theater and all kinds of uses. So I hope you'll check it out and enjoy it.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
Geraldine, any final words for?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you also, Sam and Baruch. It's been so amazing to listen to you and to see your books and listen to your music. And what's so special to me as a non-expert in Jewish music is to see how this forum is mixing generations. It's connecting people from the tip of Africa to California, to Israel, and we can all feel connected, we can all learn from each other, we can all bounce off each other, and we're really so happy with how these conversations in Zoom are going. And as Mark said, there isn't a Tuesday until the end of the year that is free, because people are really keen to talk about all kinds of subjects. So next week, David Fligg is talking to Eva Fox-Gull. Now they are dealing with music that was banned by the Nazis, and composers from Austria and Czechoslovakia who were silenced and suppressed. Their music was not allowed to be heard. Their publications were torn up. Even the print blocks were destroyed. And how they've worked to re-establish these composers, particularly Hans Gall from Austria and Gideon Klein from Czechoslovakia. So they'll be talking next week. And very interesting, on the 18th of August, Mimi Schäfer, Cantor Mimi Schäfer from Berlin, is talking to Ofra Yitzhaki. I haven't yet heard exactly what they're going to talk about, but I'm sure it'll be fascinating. And on the 25th of August, Rachel Adelstein is talking to Danielle Padley about Anglo-Jewish singing communities, past, present, and future. And then Mark on the 1st of September is hopefully talking with Samuel Adler. So every week I send you what's going on next week, if I've got your email address. And if you scroll down, it always has what's coming next. So at the bottom, you can see what's going on until the end of the year. So we'll open up from January and, you know, grab a date. And if you've had one before, you're welcome to have one again. And Baruch, I want to ask you, who painted the pictures behind you? Who painted the... Yeah.
The picture that we had in the other room was a picture of Klezmorim. I don't know
this one.
anything about this one.
Yeah. So anyway, it's very beautiful. This one also looks like Klezmorim, even though it's more abstract. So
I don't know any klezmer player that looks like that. I'm sorry.
Anyway, but thank you. It was a real treat. And we'll keep the room open for a little while if people want to talk to each other or tell anything to the group. You know, we like to think of this as an opportunity to mix and talk to each other, seeing we in so many different places. And, you know, maybe Baruch, you've got questions you want to ask us.
No, I think we covered the subject. Thank you. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Mark for inviting me here. Sam had to leave, but he was very happy to be part of this, and I was glad to have him with me.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? I just thought of something. The music is, I enjoyed it very much, and it's very infective. It grabs you. But are the Orthodox Jewish groups using your music as well as the Reform and the Conservative movements?
Oh, you're asking me about that?
Yeah, because it's, I would use it.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I have officiated in all three branches of Jewish worship. And where I was going in LA, of course, was the Beis Basalo on Pico Boulevard, which is a Chabad. And you know, I think I contributed a tune or two over there. So I would say I can't restrict myself to any particular movement.
No, because you mentioned about the English and the Hebrew, one behind the other, and there's various, and you couldn't repeat in the when you were davening in the Chabad house, you couldn't repeat, and you found it quite restrictive.
Oh, absolutely not. There had to be all Hebrew. But the Chabadniks knew more Hebrew than the members of the other congregations.
Do you find it within the synagogue today? I mean, you said it's a completely different world and other people are saying the same thing. Is it because people who go to synagogue or temple have to have a service partly in English or in English because they cannot read Hebrew or they're not taught Hebrew? I can't get my head around it. So I don't, being on this side of the pond in the UK, it's not the same. You know, our liberal groups are different from those in America. Conservative, we don't have conservative Judaism. The reform movements are slightly different again. So to get my head around different movements is very, very interesting. And my mind has been opened over the last months and months and months. And I'm just wondering if that's the case, because a lot of music is guitar orientated and in English, as opposed to being in the Hebrew language.
Well, I don't know if they have these in England too, but I see Sidurim, prayer books coming out with the Hebrew on one side and a transliteration on the other side. So if somebody cannot read Hebrew, they can read the translation and speak Hebrew. Have that? You have any of those?
Not maybe in the Reform movement. In the Orthodox movement, I think they started to use the explanations, like the Art Scroll or the Chief Rabbi's Siddur, or but in the Reform, I think United Synagogue, the Reform movement, I think uses the one from the United Synagogue of America, their Siddur, which is now slightly different from what it used to be like, because they've incorporated women in the prayer as well as men. So some of the synagogues, liberal or reform, are using that, but in the Orthodox world, transliteration doesn't happen.
May I add to the conversation?
Yes, please.
My name is Julie Pritikin, and I worked with Baruch many, many years, and I was on some of those recordings. Just to address the idea of English and Hebrew, many parents did not follow their Orthodox parents, but then they suddenly wanted to raise their children with religion. So the kids are learning Hebrew, and the parents don't know any. So adding the English enabled the family to go to shul and participate and be part of it. So that is a big trend in both Reform and Conservative to have English and the Hebrew as part of the service.
Thank you, Julie,
Welcome.
for saying that.
Thank you.
I mean, in so many prayers, there was Aramaic. Wasn't that the lingua franca?
Yes.
So why not have the lingua franca? I want rabbis to lane in English. Have you tried that?
Well, no, the trop don't fit the English words very well.
You have to work on it. You have to work on it.
At my son's congregation here, we lane in Hebrew with the trop, and then read the English translation. Just read it, so people can understand it either way.
But it's so powerful if you actually sing English with the trope. You've got to work it out carefully, but it's really powerful.
Probably is.
That's my challenge. I'm throwing it out.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how it fits in using the same trop in Hebrew for the words in English.
You have to work it out. If you look on the ECA website, you'll see how to do it.
Yeah,
It also needs to be a good.
Did Hirsch do it?
It also needs to be a good translation.
Hirsch did it. He did a good job.
First thing that occurs to me is that Hebrew is much more compact than English. You have to have, like, if you put the same trop in English, you have to have 3 or 4 words to each trop, because that's what it's called. It calls for that.
Yeah.
Yes, but the words are considerably shorter very often. I've never tried laning in English. I've tried davening in English and also in Russian, because I am in Germany, where most of the Jews are Russian. And I have often gotten very negative reactions from people who think that anything sung in the vernacular, except of course what they're used to singing in the vernacular, sounds like church music. But I certainly agree in principle with the idea that people should understand what is going on in shul. Although sometimes I get the impression people would rather not understand. Somehow the aura of mystery is ruined if they know what it's all about. I have a question for you, going back to something you mentioned earlier, the article in JAMS in 1950. I'm just curious what sort of reactions you got to that article from musicologists at that time.
They were, whatever reactions I remember were all positive. I didn't get any negative criticism about it.
Was there any particular interest?
Well, our friend Mark here is a good example of interest. He took a strong interest in it. He used it in his classes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful discussion point for us to really bring up in the future. And I know Boaz Tarsi is here and a number of other individuals who've really studied Nusach on a very serious level and a level that's looking at things in new ways. And we look forward to having that kind of conversation.
Maybe we can do that in the future, one of the panel events, and maybe get 5 or 6 people from around the world in different groups.
I know that they've had working groups on this topic in Israel, and a number of people who have been working very hard on this. So this would be a very interesting subject for us to continue.
Actually, I think what you may be getting at is that my article concentrates on Eastern European tradition. If you get a Sephardic cantor, he'll have different examples of the same kind of nusach. His nusach is different because his whole tradition is different for many centuries.
I'm interested in like 1 or 2 questions about this article, if I may.
Yes.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, because, you know, it's such a historiographical event. Do you remember, first of all, was it your initiative to submit it, or was it actually where somebody approached you to contribute it?
I'm sorry.
So he's asking, what was the origins of this article? Did you initiate it? Did someone initiate it? You sort of already talked about it, but maybe you could clarify.
Well, as I told you, I had already learned this from Shalom, and we were getting ready to put out the 3rd edition of Idelson's songbook, which I was editing. Well, you know, who am I as an editor? So my parents encouraged me to write this article to show that I was qualified to be this editor. And that was the origin of it, really. But all I did was lay it out in order of sequence, what I already knew. That was the reason for it, I think, was to establish my qualifications.
But how did you ever get the Journal of the American Musicological Society to be interested in a topic like this?
I can't answer that question. I did not actually submit it myself. My parents did, and I think because my mother had this publishing company that she set up for the purpose of publishing books, that they probably accepted it. For that reason.
Thanks. No, that's an interesting piece of information. Do you remember who were the peer review, whoever were the readers who afforded the submission?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay.
I don't have information.
All right, thanks.
All right, well, thank you all. This was really a wonderful, well, for us, morning here in LA, but a wonderful time. And thank you so much, Baruch, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thank you so much. Have a pleasant evening. Have a pleasant day. God bless you all.
All right, thank you all. Thank you again, Baruch.
I just have to take back what I told you. I couldn't last an hour and a half. I just did.
You did, and you did. It was great. Thank you so much.
We loved it. Really enjoyable. Thank you.
Many thanks. Okay.